Welcome, I'm David Distelhorst, the local history librarian at Bexley Public Library. Before we get started, I will cover some quick notes about the format of this program. This is a hybrid program, which means we have in-person and virtual audience members. There will be presentation followed by questions and answers. For those of you watching online, please submit your questions through the Bexley Public Library YouTube channel at any time, and we will share them at the end. This program is also being recorded and will be accessible on the Bexley Public Library YouTube channel. And now for a few programs coming up. Uncover Your House History, a class on the resources used for researching the history of a house, will be offered twice in the next week. This Wednesday, May 22nd at 2 p.m. and Saturday, May 25th at 11 a.m. Registration is required and space is limited. You can still register at bexleylibrary.org/local history. And now a few words of introduction about tonight's speaker. Toby Brief is the Executive Director and Curator at the Columbus Jewish Historical Society. She was first interested in genealogy. However, while growing up in Columbus with a strong Jewish family identity and tradition of giving back, she found her way to history. At the Historical Society, she creates exhibits and programs chronicling the stories of Jewish people from Columbus and Central Ohio while collecting and preserving the history for future generations.
Okay. It's a good thing we know just about everybody in the audience tonight, so this will be fun. And including, I have to tell you all that my kindergarten and first grade teacher is here sitting in the very front. So you know where I came from, in Berwick Elementary School. Anyway, nearly 45 years ago, the Columbus Jewish Historical Society was formed to collect and preserve and educate about the Jewish history of Central Ohio. And today we maintain that same message. In fact, we're the only repository, and we like to invite people to come in. Before you leave, feel free to take a newsletter and find out about us, call us for an appointment, and come and visit the archives and see what you can find there. We've recently renovated our archive space. Our small exhibit right now is called Treasures from the Archives 2020 to 2023. And it's about the COVID years. So it's about those years when you cleaned out your closets and your basements, and you contemplated your mortality, and you thought about your legacy, and then you brought a whole bunch of stuff over to us. So we're pretty excited about it, and we're still trying to get it all into the archive. We're excited to bring you down there, so please do come and visit us, and we can show you how we've grown. And now we'll get started. So today's program is, hang on, everything's new here today. Today's program is Crossing Columbus, and it's Jewish migration across the city. It's something that we consider as we do a lot of our exhibits and our programs, something that we really didn't think about a lot in the beginning, but that migration, that path we've taken is really important to our history. A couple of things just to remember as we go through this. The Columbus population in 2024 is estimated to be roughly 910,000. The Jewish Columbus estimates that the Jewish population in the area is roughly 25,000. So just bear in mind that that means that it's under 3% of the population that's Jewish. So we're telling a story of a very tiny community here. It's a tiny population within the metropolitan area, but how we grew and how we moved is really important to the entire story of the city. So beginning at the beginning, and some of you have heard about this many times, what you see here is a map showing the original home of those first Jews who settled in Columbus permanently. They came from Middleton, Germany, which you can see is right in this area here. It's part of Bavaria. We know that there were quite a few non-Jews who were non-Jews, Germans, living in Columbus originally. Many of them came from the same area. And we believe that that's exactly why we got here. Somebody heard from maybe their non-Jewish neighbor or knew of a non-Jewish friend who had moved here. And Columbus seemed like a good place to be and a land of opportunity. We do know that the initial immigrants came directly to Columbus. So you didn't see them stopping in other places along the way. They came to Columbus for some reason, and we assume that that's because they knew it would be an easy place for them to settle into. The first Jewish arrival was a man by the name of Judah Nussbaum. He came here in 1838, so 25 years after Columbus became the capital, and about 4 years after Columbus was actually incorporated as a city. Judah was followed by his close friend, Nathan Gundersheimer, and then Judah Nussbaum's family came over, and then the Gundersheimer brothers came over, and it went on from there. So it's this classic chain migration of people who knew each other, each one meeting somebody else and bringing them along. In fact, all of the Jews who settled here in the very earliest years came from the same town. They all came from Middleton. It's a very well-studied town, and their migration is very well-studied. You can see within 10 years that they do start coming from other areas of Germany, from other towns in the area, but that initial group was all Middleton. So they arrived as peddlers, and they quickly arranged for more stable housing. It was all rental at the time, of course, but they lived right in the middle of town, and they often lived behind their shops or over their shops. They were also often located, and almost usually located, along High Street. So here you see the earliest ad that we've ever been able to find. It's from Der Westbote, dated 1843, October of 1843, and it announces the opening of Nathan Gundersheimer and Brothers' new store, and it's announcing it to the German public. So men's clothing and tailoring was his first business. And the interesting thing to note is this is the ad. It's actually written in German in one of the several German newspapers in Columbus, and it was really to a German audience. So this is why the Jews got here and felt so incredibly comfortable in Columbus. There wasn't what happened later where you had to learn the language very quickly. You were sort of adrift. The Germans were selling to the Germans. They all knew each other. This was a very German town. So Columbus is growing rapidly. When Judah Nussbaum arrives in 1838, there are about 3,500 people. By 1850, there are about 18,000. Columbus is really drawing people in. In the 1858 city directory, it's sort of interesting. We've got the Gundersheimers, the second family in. They have 3 stores: High Street between Town and Rich, High Street between State and Sugar Alley, and High Street between State and Town. The Nussbaum family, clothing store again, High Street next to South Street. And they also had a confectionery. This was a little unusual. Most of the German Jews were in the clothing business, but one of the Nussbaums had a confectionery. Joseph Goodman, also clothing, northwest corner of Rich Street and High Street. The Amberg family clothing store, High Street between State and Town. Simon Lazarus, who, if you're from Columbus or if you're familiar, lived here for a while, the Lazarus stores, huge. Where were they? High Street between Town and Rich. And Moses Schlesinger, who was also a confectioner, was High Street between Town and Rich. So everybody is very centrally located. It's a tight, tight area. And they're living within a block or two of their houses, if not, of their businesses, if not in the same homes. Oops. By 1846, which is 8 years after Judah Nussbaum had arrived, there were 11 Jewish men, which is one more than is needed to have a minyan and begin to have formal services. And here you see the actual area in which these services were held. Again, rented space. In the 1850s, again, they're on High Street. Where else would they be? And we know that they're also conducting services over a gun shop, Siebert's Gun Shop. That was a big deal in Columbus. It was a very famous gun shop, and that's where the services were held. Everybody could walk to the services. These were traditional Jews. They weren't Reform at this point. They were traditional, and this is where they were. And in fact, we know that the synagogue happened to be right here. It's the building right next to this picture. It's just outside of the photo, unfortunately. But we do know that that is exactly where they were located. So you can get a feel for what it was like. They were in rented spaces, actually, until the 1870s. So as I said, everybody walks to the synagogue. They walk to their business. It's 1869. Here you see a few of the Jewish residences, just to kind of give you a feel for how close together they were. Now, they've been in town for 20 years at this point, but they haven't moved very far out of downtown. So you're seeing that we've moved a few blocks. That's about it. And what we have here are some homes. There was one of the Gumbles who actually owned a saloon by this time. The Lazarus family is on Rich Street. The Gundersheimers are on Friend, which is Main Street. And another Gundersheimer was on Mound. These houses are all within a couple of blocks of each other. And again, very, very close to downtown. The other thing that's important is purchasing cemetery land. And this is important to every religion. It's one of the most important duties of your religious group. And by 1872, the first Jew was dying in Columbus of cholera. And the Jews went out and bought cemetery land. It's just another statement of how they're settling in the town. The first man to die was a man by the name of Louis Schreier, and he was buried in the Jewish cemetery. Jews, of course, are not to be buried with other religions. So what they did was they bought this little area, and you'll see we're off of Livingston Avenue. This is where Livingston Avenue makes that turn. And this is the old East Cemetery here. And so we bought this little area up here. That's where the first Jewish burial was. This no longer exists, by the way. The other point about this is that it's not that far. Again, you can easily walk to the cemetery. We're still not that really far away from downtown. And you'll see that also none of this land has really been developed. There's still a lot of farmland. We're right basically on the edge of town. You do see that lots have been laid out here in what is considered sort of, it's a little east of German Village. Lots are laid out up here. But it really goes off into much more unused land at the time. So as we move sort of into the 1870s, the German Jewish population is really stabilized. Organizations have been established for men and women. Businesses have grown and really are flourishing. The Columbus population is about 30,000. The Jewish population is estimated to be about 420. So we're at, 1.5%. Again, a very, very tiny population, but they are doing incredibly well. They're beginning to move out of downtown. They're beginning to move on the same streets, but just a few blocks further. So they're moving east as they go. The population itself, the Jewish population, has changed as well. It's become very strong. It's strong enough to support and actually build a new synagogue. And this is the first actual synagogue that was built in Columbus. It was called B'nai Israel. It's the forerunner of Temple Israel. It grew out of the traditional congregation, but it was separate. It was something new. And this was a Reform congregation. The Jewish population has been in Columbus for 50 years at this point. They're, as I said, very organized, very philanthropic. They're serving in the city. They're serving in government, city government to some extent. There are lawyers. There are some doctors, saloonists, and, of course, the clothing business, which is huge. And so here you can kind of track the movement at this point. And what they've done is we've come out of this downtown area where we were along High Street, and we're moving along Broad Street. So to orient you, that's Broad Street. This is Main Street, and down here is Livingston. The German Jews are between Broad Street and Main Street for the most part, and they're continuing to move out to the east. And you see their houses are on Town Street, on Rich Street, Chapel, all of these streets going out this direction. They haven't gone too far, but it's a very contained movement in one direction. So at the end of the 1870s, German population really isn't growing that much anymore. It's growing steadily, very slowly. However, what's happening is that in 1881, you begin to see the massive migration coming from Russia and from Eastern Europe. It starts slowly, and it starts because conditions in Russia and Eastern Europe are getting worse, but it grew very quickly. Once again, the earliest of these people settled very close to downtown, which is not on this map. They settled very close to downtown as they learned the language. This is the settlers from about 1881 to about 1885, 86. So that just the very, very beginning of this. And once they've done that, they've started to move. Once they get settled, once they start their businesses, they also begin to move, and they move a little bit to the east. Where they settle, whoops, sorry about that. Where you see them settling is in this area here. So again, we're at Livingston, Main, and Broad Street's up here. They start to move into this area. So we've come down, downtown's in here, out here. They're coming down and they're moving into this area. It's affordable. There are rentals, but there's also land here. And people of this wave, especially around the end of the 1880s, the 1890s, are really moving into this area. And it will eventually become fondly remembered as the old Jewish neighborhood. It centers on Donaldson Street, which is here, and Washington, or Donaldson Avenue. Donaldson Street and Washington Avenue. So it centers right here, and it goes north, south, east from there. It's just south of the area where the Germans are. The Germans have moved along Broad Street at this point. And you see them, their houses are a little bit bigger. They're much more settled economically. They've been here 50 years longer. So they're doing well. But they're helping the Russian Eastern European people to settle as well. The peddling went on for a little while.
Oh, it's better, I think. Let's switch you out to a, just a minute.
We hope they moved, oh, thanks. We hope they moved.
Cincinnati had a Jewish community years before Columbus.
Yeah.
It even had a, what do you call a place where they train rabbis?
Yeah, when they had the seminary, but that's not what it was called. The college. Hebrew, yeah, it was Hebrew Union. So yeah, in Columbus, what happened was that after East Cemetery, the city said, that's it, no more, we're growing past this area, everybody has to leave. The Jews actually chose to go not to Green Lawn, but they chose to go to Mount Calvary, which is where the old baseball stadium is down, well, it's near the old baseball stadium, basically. And, ready? Hold on.
Sorry to interrupt.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Maybe I won't plug this back on to me. Okay, so sorry about that little break. But anyway, going back to the cemeteries. So East Cemetery, when it was no longer going to be used, people had to move out from both the non-Jewish and the Jewish burials. The Jews made a conscious decision not to go to Green Lawn, and instead they purchased land near Mount Calvary, near the old baseball stadium, and the bodies were moved. The bodies were moved from from both of those graveyards. Were they all moved? We hope so. Can anybody tell?
Calvary in,
What?
where is this Mount Calvary place?
Mount Calvary it's near the old baseball stadium. We actually purchased a small plot of land that was adjacent so that we wouldn't be in the Christian burial.
Can you tell me where there's a couple lane streets out there? Oh,
Yeah.
Mount West, okay.
Thanks. I'm geographically challenged, but yes, I can go east, that's it. Yeah, and then after a while, they did buy into Green Lawn, and so some of those bodies were moved a third time, they were moved a third time, actually, to Green Lawn. So you do find people in Green Lawn that were moved a lot. So, yeah, it's an interesting story. But anyway, going back to where we are here at the old neighborhood, I was just about to talk about the cemeteries, actually. That was very handy. So this is a little bit closer view of this Donaldson area. And what you can see is it really was this fabulous area, very diverse, mixed business and residential. You had poultry and egg dealers, you had soda manufacturers, scrap yards. All of these things were side by side with the homes. It was also a diverse population. It was a black and white population. It was Jewish and non-Jewish. It was a very interesting area. Very, very tightly packed, lots and lots of houses. The Jewish organizations moved in, again, helped by the earlier Germans who had done a lot for this new wave of migration that was coming in. They built a settlement house to Americanize people. We had Jewish education there, a Talmud Torah, which became the Hebrew school eventually. There was a mikveh, the ritual bath, and there were at least 4 synagogues there. This concentration of Jews was really high, but it was also just a high concentration in general. The blue pins that you see are service organizations, so that's providing aid, cultural activities, education, and financial help. Oh, it comes out really well in here, much better than on my screen. So you can see how, again, tightly packed this was, and this was all serving this very tightly packed community. It's incumbent on Jews to take care of their own and not to become a burden on society. That's just something we've always believed in because we've moved so much as a people. So the aid organizations were there, and they were really helping to Americanize the Jews as quickly as possible. And this wave was just massive. These people just were coming by the hundreds and thousands into the country. This was also a huge period of unrest in Europe, so as many people were getting out as possible. But when World War I came, it really put a stop to this. The older Jewish German population had still moved, again, a little bit further to the east. Again, same roads, but they're really following a very tight path. The other thing you can see in this slide is the red pins all represent synagogues. So what you see is the synagogues have moved from downtown to here. This was temporary space. And then Aguda Sachem becomes the big synagogue of the Orthodox, the Russian Eastern Europeans, and is right there at the corner of Donaldson and Washington, which was really important to them. This happens in about 1907 that they moved to this location. The interesting thing is that 2 years later, in 1909, Beth Jacob congregation splits off from Aguda Sachem, moves right here. Another year or two later, Ahava Sholem splits off and moves right here. It's evidence of these communities becoming more developed, more settled, and they're able to now break apart from the one synagogue in the beginning to really begin to worship in the way that they had worshiped in the old country, or the way that they're more comfortable with. Kenny?
This is part of the South High area, this neighborhood.
The
Teenagers from this neighborhood, they go to South High.
The ones down below here went to South High. Some of these went to South High. I don't know exactly where the line was, but some of them went up to East, and some actually, there were also a small group of Jews living out in Flytown, Flytown is where the Arena District is, and they were going to Central High. So you got both south, really south and east is where the kids here went. So anyway, the synagogues are moving, but you're seeing them break apart, and that's the important thing, is that you're seeing that the population has really become much more settled, they're much more comfortable, and they're also beginning to get a little more prosperous. And again, here's the path across the city. So, rats. Here's the path across the city. And this is the Germans. They're continuing to go out here a little bit further. And here is the more Russian Eastern European. This is not a rule by any means, but it's just a tendency that where these groups were and what their financial situations were at the time. So you're seeing this group sort of move out along the Livingston Avenue, Main to Livingston Avenue, and this group is moving out along the Main to Broad Street, but they're all going east. They're all cooperating in some of these philanthropic organizations. They're all helping each other. So where do they go as they go to the east? They go to Bexley. That's the next area we've come to. Yes?
I think I once heard that like Jews and Catholics could easily buy on Broad, and Jews and Catholics were largely unrighted.
There were restrictions. There were restrictions all over the city in various areas. It was very Bexley. There's no question. There were restrictions in the deeds, and you can find those. You see them a lot in your Bexley deeds now, particularly in sort of the central Bexley houses. And there were restrictions in a lot of other areas that we'll get to in just a second. But yeah, there's definitely areas. So, which was exactly the point of this, because this is after World War I. So World War I, everything quiets down. Nobody goes anywhere. There's not a lot of the immigration has really been closed down to a large extent, and we've gotten to this point where the wealthier Jews were wanting to move into larger houses and into a social area, a social strata that they had risen to, and they wanted to be near their friends. So on April 11th of 1920, 3 Jewish families purchased homes in Bexley. How it happened, all of the details, the nitty-gritty, we don't know. And it would be fascinating to find out at some point. But they did all 3 purchase on the same day. There is no question about that. They were Robert Levy, Simon Lazarus, and Russell Joseph, 3 major names in business in Columbus. This happens to be the Robert Levy house. It's 78 South Drexel. Clearly, it still exists. It was actually built in 1920. The Bryden house also supposedly, there's some question about the date that the Bryden house was built. Some of the records say 24, but that parcel of land where 2180 basically is now, which happens to be for sale, is the original land. It's the original house. So in the next 2 years, there were 11 more families that bought in. And so Bexley was open. There were still areas that were harder to get into. There were still deed restrictions written into the paperwork, but Bexley was open at this point. So not long after people moved into Bexley, Tifereth Israel moved from the old neighborhood into the Broad Street area. That's 1927. This is the first departure from the old neighborhood. So people have been living there roughly 40 years. And this was the first time you really see a major departure. Temple Israel had decided that they wanted to do this. They were moving a bit away from where their congregation was. And this happens to be the 1927 building. When you go past Tifereth Israel today, you still see this, but you see a major addition to the east of this structure. Again, the people are beginning to move. And in this case, in Tifereth's case, the congregants somewhat followed the building. And so the building anticipated where they were going to go. But it was Broad Street. It was a little bit of a different neighborhood. The other thing that was happening also at this time that we just talked about is where the kids were beginning to graduate from. And again, you see they've moved away from Central High School, which is where COSI is today. They've moved away from Central High, that's center of the city, and they're graduating from South and East and just beginning to graduate from Bexley. So they're starting to move along. Let's see. So not long after this, we also see the 1950s is really a time of change. And in the 1950s, you've just gotten out of World War II, which was a lull again. And everyone is moving. It's a new world. Everybody's out of this. The war is over. There's a lot of change happening within the city. It's a really exciting time in terms of building and construction and movement. And the Jewish community is really no change. Bexley's Jewish population is growing. Berwick and Eastmoor are becoming places for the Russian Eastern European group that's moving along. Berwick also had restrictions for a while written into their deeds. And so what's considered Old Berwick, which is sort of the Berwick Boulevard area, that area also had some restrictions to it as well. But there was so much new development and so much happening and so much demand that the population just kept on going. So what you see here is a Agudath Sachem, and this is a Agudath Sachem on their opening day in 1951. So they have now moved out, and it's about 25 years after Tifereth Israel, but they've now moved out of the old neighborhood. They are going with their congregation, but they're also anticipating how many more are going to be coming along from those areas. They have moved to Broad Street. So again, this is an Orthodox congregation. It was a little bit harder for everybody to walk, and their congregation tended to follow them into the areas around Roosevelt and then into Berwick and Eastmoor as well, where they could easily walk. So you're beginning to see this, the old neighborhood is breaking down. And for those of us who grew up on the east side, this is our Jewish center. You see here that not only were the synagogues moving, but the community centers, the social services are also moving. The Jewish Community Center, this was again early 1950s. This is their construction just a little bit before their opening day. They were being created because the Jewish powers that be in the city really wanted the kids to get together. They didn't want this division, the Bexley Jews, the Eastmoor Jews, the downtown Jews. They really wanted a central location. And it took a long time to decide on this parcel of land. When they finally did, though, it became the Jewish center that we all knew and loved. It's still there today. It just looks a lot different. And there's no bowling alley. So, yeah. But it does show that, again, the Jewish Center actually anticipated some of the people that were moving around it. This area was not terribly developed at this point, so this really was new, and it really was exciting, and it really did what it was meant to do by bringing the kids together. All the clubs were there, the social organizations were there, the philanthropic organizations were there as well. So you saw just everybody in this one building, and it was also really built to showcase the cultural aspect of Judaism. Israel had just become a country, and so that was a time of real growth in the pride of Jewish culture. The other thing that you see happening in the later 1950s is that Temple Israel, which is still on Bryden Road at this point, but that by the end of the 1950s, Temple Israel makes a giant leap and goes way out on Broad Street. And they were anticipating their congregation following them, which it did to some extent. That whole area began to be built up. It took a while, and Temple Israel remained there for many, many years until coming back into town, making that one westward movement back into town on Broad Street. So another factor that really made a difference in where people were moving was urban renewal. So the Federal Highway Act, 1956, urban renewal right around the same period of time, slum clearance funding, this all really, really affected what we considered the old Jewish neighborhood. And what you'll see is that here's that little area of Livingston that we've been talking about. This is where originally the cemeteries, that old cemetery we talked about at first, was located in here. This is also the triangle, basically, where Donaldson and Washington were. This is where Central Market was located. This entire area was really the Jewish area, the old neighborhood. People had already started moving out of there. It was already becoming a rougher area. But there were lots of businesses there, and there were still quite a few people living in that general vicinity. This is why we don't take you on tours of old Jewish Columbus, because the Jews either lived right downtown, which Columbus was notorious for not saving a lot of their old buildings. There's nothing to show you, so we don't take you there. We could do a virtual tour, but we cannot do a physical tour. There's just nothing left. And when this area came down, that was the oldest of many of the oldest of the synagogues. And right along the way, even up on Bryden Road with Temple Israel, those buildings have all disappeared. Flytown, that was the other area that we were just talking about near the Arena District. Flytown also was part of this massive urban renewal. There were 4 projects of slum clearance. Flytown was one of them. And this was urban renewal of the 1960s. It was anticipated, the 1940s, you knew it was coming. There was no question. People were already beginning to move out of a lot of those areas. Jews, they mostly, again, moved to the east. There were a few people who, again, this is not hard and fast. There were people who moved up along High Street into the campus district. There were some people that moved, that were on the other side of the river, closer to Cosi Central High School. And there were definitely families that lived south of Livingston, right in here. That's Ann Street, Wager Street, some of which exist. Most of the houses don't really exist anymore if we went looking for the Jewish houses. But that was also another area. But this is sort of the main overall view of what was happening. But also by the late 1950s, one more group was there, and one more group was showing up in the campus area. And this was the academics who came to Ohio State, as well as the people who were coming to work at Battelle, at the other research laboratories that were around. It was a totally different group. They were not typically from Columbus. They were brought here and by their businesses or by the university. And they really formed their own group up in the North Side. It was called the North Side Jewish Community Association. and it eventually became Beth Tikva. It took them till 1961 when they established the new congregation, and they moved actually further up, and there they are in 1962. That was their first location. And what you see is that they move up north. They're in Clintonville, and then they move up to Worthington, which is where they are today. And their success really shows how important, how strong these communities were, how much they really banded together, they lived close to each other, and they formed their own congregations. And then, of course, the newest is New Albany, where there was a group that moved out to New Albany. Again, it's sort of to the east, a little to the north, but you're still going that easterly direction. And New Albany, again, there was a need for a synagogue. There was a synagogue out there and also a Jewish center preschool. And that really reflected the people that had moved out in that direction, but they anticipated more than actually came. But who knows? We'll see what happens as we continue to move. So this is where we are today. And basically, synagogues follow their members, like we had talked about a little bit earlier, but sometimes they precede them. With more people now driving to services, not walking with the different, it's no longer just the traditional like there was with the Germans or the Orthodox communities that still need to live very close. There still is really a group, and you can still see this area that people are moving in. You can see here that we have moved from everybody being in the center of the city right here. They've moved north, again, along High Street. This is Sukkot Shalom. This is a Reconstructionist Jewish synagogue, or Jewish congregation. They don't have a permanent space. And then we have Beth Tikva up here in Worthington now. We have the whole group along Broad Street, Tifereth, Ahava Shalom. Oh my God, and I'm going to Sockham. Right, you guys got it. And then back into Bexley, Torret Emmett, and Beth Jacob down here in Berwick. On where? Sukkot Shalom. That's Sukkot Shalom. Yeah, that's it used to be called Little Minyan, and it's now called Sukkot Shalom. Right, and they share space in a church. Yeah, that's the one. Were they in Clintonville? They were down here in Clintonville. They had two locations closer to that star, closer to the Sukkot Shalom star. They were right along sort of, I forget the name of the street offhand, but right down along High Street, right in here, just a little bit north of campus. So we see that all of these people have moved, and you can see why we don't have tours anymore, or we never did. And you can see how many of these buildings are actually gone. But this is really what the migration has been across the city. And this is really the path that the Jewish population as a whole has taken, getting across the city, mostly moving to the east, and a little bit then later to the north and the northeast. But really, it's very linear. It goes right out east. And that is what I have for you. So any questions? Yes?
You mentioned Mr. Lazarus, and I thought you said arrived in Columbus 1840, 1857 or 8. Is it that when he founded the department store?
Yes.
The guy who bought a house in 1820, is that the same guy?
No. So Simon Lazarus is the one that came first, and he was there in the 1850s. The man that bought the store was his grandson. That bought the house was his grandson.
What was the name of the guy that founded the department store?
Simon Lazarus.
Yeah, so he had the department store when the Civil War was going on.
Yeah, he did. And the Union came, the Levy store, the Union, if you know the Union store, that came during the Civil War. But the Gundersheimer store became the fashion, which was around in the 1960s and 70s, if you happen to know that one. A lot of these stores started very early. Lazarus was very special. It was a fascinating store. Their history is absolutely amazing, the things that they were able to do. And they grew very quickly. Lazarus came to Columbus because there was already a relative of his by the name of Aronson who lived in Columbus. And he came to join Aronson, and they had a store together in around 1851-ish. And then he went out on his own, and then his two sons, Fred and Ralph, F&R Lazarus, Fred and Ralph Lazarus started their store. So Simon had the original one, Fred and Ralph started a second one, and it's the Fred and Ralph store that went on to become the Lazarus that we knew.
Did you give a population of Columbus in like 1857 or whatever?
In 1857? Not offhand. I have it, but I don't have it in my head.
I have
But
a
I can
question.
tell you. Yeah.
Were the title restrictions individual, or were they by a city or community, or how?
They were individually written into the deeds.
Interesting.
Yeah. And you will still find them if you look through Bexley deeds. They're frequently there.
Yeah, in fact, recently there was news about Upper Arlington about how some of those title or deed restrictions are still
Yes.
still in the deeds.
Yeah. Yeah. And Upper Arlington was later.
A lot of them are no Jews, no blacks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Very clearly spelled out. And we've seen several of them from around here.
Has there been an effort to remove that, or is it an individual title that does that?
There's not a formal effort. It was made clear that was against the city rules in different locations, handled it in different ways. But it was all through Columbus as well. So
Yeah, I
that's-
believe there's a federal law that
Right.
made it illegal to enforce.
Getting back to population, you said that Columbus had 18,000 as of a certain year.
Yeah.
Was that the late 1840s or the 1850s?
Hang on, I don't keep numbers in my head very well. Right.
1870 is 30,000, that's right.
Right.
In 1850, Cincinnati had 115,000. The largest
Oh, yeah.
city west of the Allegheny Mountains.
Oh, yeah.
It's only strong competitors of Philadelphia and New York, and maybe another city or two on the East Coast.
Right. And they had they had a very active Jewish population there. There was lots of philanthropic stuff going on. There was lots of social activities. There was all sorts of things going on in Cincinnati. And a lot of the information that we get about early Columbus comes from Hebrew Union College and from the publications that came out and from the people that would go to the college. So there were all of these travelers who would go through to Cincinnati. They would come through Columbus and they talk about how it was a small, quaint town. And we saw a few Jews there and we were welcomed into their homes.
Well, a state rep from Cincinnati came to Columbus, I don't know, 1830s, and he did his business inside the state house, and he walked outside and he saw cows grazing. And he said, I don't believe this is a cow.
Absolutely. And it wasn't until late into...
They got more history.
Yeah. Yeah, so Columbus grew very, very quickly, but its infrastructure didn't grow quite as quickly as the amount of people that were coming. Even though it was the capital, it took a while to get the paved roads and to really grow as quickly as Cincinnati, which was also a river town. It was much easier to get into Cincinnati. But we caught up to some extent.
What's the population of the Jewish population in this area today?
It's around 25,000. So it's like 2.5% of the population of Metro Columbus. So this is really a tiny, tiny look at migration. And it was sort of interesting to think about that after we talked originally about doing this presentation. We're only a tiny part of what happened, but there was a huge effect. The Jewish effect on the city was dramatic. Certainly the stores, the retail stores. There was a period of time where, if you look in the city directories back in the 1860s, where almost every single store that dealt in men's clothing was a Jewish store. And you saw that some of the addresses that I was giving you earlier, its brother has one store and an uncle has another store, and they just lined High Street. We saw that. We just did a program on fur, Jews in the fur industry. And you saw the same thing. You saw a lot of those stores in the same locations.
During the Civil War, were they at all involved in manufacturing uniforms or anything for the Union?
Not much here. However, the thing about this, the famous thing about the Civil War is that right after the Civil War, Simon Lazarus, of the original Simon Lazarus of Lazarus Store fame, went to Rochester, New York. And he actually picked up the first ready-made clothing. Ready-made clothing was a product of the Civil War. It wasn't done before that. But with the soldiers, they understood how they had to clothe all of these people. So ready-made clothing became something that, maybe everybody would like this, rather than going to get tailored. And the first 200 suits that were ever brought to Columbus, ready-made, were brought by Simon Lazarus. And we believe, I've worked with Ohio State on this for a long time, we are almost positive that when Simon Lazarus left Columbus to go pick up these suits, he went to see his cousin Aronson, the guy who had left Columbus, that used to be his partner. Aronson moved to Rochester, and during the Civil War actually produced suits and went into the ready-made business.
Well, Rochester was a smart place because it's so far north. Cleveland began to boom during the Civil War because industrialists said that if they built a factory making, cannon wheels in Cleveland, that if the Confederates got that far north, then they'd taken over all of the north, and it's a lost cause.
Right. Well, the clothing industry saw a lot of in New York, and that's where they had gone. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
So this might be a totally crackpot theory, but my uncle was really into geography, and he believed that the Jews liked to move to the east in many cities because it's closer to Jerusalem. He said he had studied a bunch of cities.
Well, like the Eastern Wall, the prestigious wall.
Right.
It wasn't real thing. I'm throwing it out here so you can add like a little poetic aspect.
If you look around American cities, if you
Yes.
compare it to most of these, obviously Chicago, it doesn't work because it's so late.
Right.
But for most cities, they did tend to
Yeah.
be on the east side.
There are actually people that are studying that migration pattern and why people go to the east. So, yes. That's it, yeah. So, but yeah, it is something that people are actually looking into. It's fascinating. Anything else? Yes.
When the big influx of people from Russia and Eastern Europe started, who taught them English?
They were taught by a lot of the German population that was already here. They immediately set up schools or set up classes, and they very, very, very quickly set up organizations for the people to go to. It was much easier entry into Columbus because the Germans spoke German. But they, again, like I said, they'd been here for quite a while before the Russian Eastern European group came in. So there was a Columbus Council of Jewish Women. There was a couple of other organizations that were existing at the time, and there was a sisterhood of Temple Israel. They immediately got involved in acclimating the immigrants and trying to make life as easy as they could, or move them on to other places. They were also very involved with the movement of Jews even further west or to areas. Somebody might end up in Columbus because one of the organizations sent you here. So the Jews of Columbus, the German Jews who were here already, got very involved in trying to move these people to wherever their family actually was.
Right. Well, thank you, Toby. The library is closing in a few minutes, so if anyone needs the elevator, just let us know. We'll make sure you get up that way. Thank you.